The day I found out my husband was leaving me for his paralegal, I was standing in our kitchen making grilled cheese for our 7-year-old twins. I remember that detail clearly. The butter sizzling, the bread browning just a little too fast on one side, the twins arguing over something on the iPad because it's the kind of mundane snapshot your brain locks onto when the world underneath it is cracking open. He came home early. That should have been my first sign. My husband, whose entire identity was built around never leaving the office before 7, walked through the front door at 4:30 on a Tuesday, with his tie loosened and that particular look on his face. The one I'd seen him practice in the mirror before difficult client calls. "We need to talk," he said. I already knew. Not in the way people say they knew in movies, some dramatic thunderclap realization. I knew the way you know a storm is coming when you can smell the air change. Something had been off for months. He'd started working late in ways that didn't produce anything I could see. He started charging cologne to our joint account, which he never wore when he came home to me. He started saying things like, "You deserve someone who can really be present for you," which I'd learned is what people say when they want permission they haven't earned. Still, hearing it out loud did something to me that I hadn't prepared for. "I've been seeing someone," he said. "It's serious. I'm sorry, Renata. I'm sorry. I'm." He stopped. He couldn't even remember to use my name. After 11 years, after 2 children and a mortgage and his mother's hip surgery, and the 4 years I'd spent putting him through law school on a teacher's salary, he stood there in our kitchen, where the grilled cheese was starting to burn and he could not remember my name. I turned off the burner. I set the spatula down. I looked at him, really looked, and I felt something inside me go very, very still. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay, I heard you. Okay." He'd clearly rehearsed for a different conversation. He'd probably expected tears or throwing, or the kind of screaming that would let him feel justified later. What he got was me scraping the burnt cheese into the sink and calling the twins to come eat their dinner because they were hungry and I was still their mother, and some things do not pause for a husband's confession. His name was to me now, simply my husband. The man I'd built a life with, or thought I had. Hers, the paralegal, was a name I won't give weight to here. She was 26. She drove a white Audi that I later found out he'd helped finance using funds from our home equity line of credit. I found that out from his father. His father. That's the part nobody expected. Least of all me. My father-in-law was 71 years old, recently diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's and living in a 2-bedroom condo 40 minutes from us that he paid for entirely himself from a life of careful saving and 40 years of running a small HVAC business. He was a quiet man, the kind of man who showed up on your doorstep on a Saturday to fix a leaking pipe without being asked. The kind of man who sent birthday cards to the twins with a $5 bill folded inside. Not because he couldn't afford more, but because he believed a child should feel the significance of holding their own money. When I married my husband, his father and I took to each other quickly. I think we were both a little surprised by it. My own father had passed when I was 19, and there was something in my father-in-law's steady, no-nonsense warmth that filled a specific kind of quiet in me. My husband found this mildly irritating. He loved his father, I think, in the distant, obligatory way of sons who never quite figured out how to sit still next to a man who didn't demand anything from them. But the closeness between his father and me confused him. He didn't know what to do with it, so he mostly ignored it. After the confession in the kitchen, I called my father-in-law. Not to tell on his son, I wasn't interested in that. I called because he'd texted me that morning asking if I could pick up his blood pressure's prescription, and in the middle of everything collapsing, I thought, well, this still needs doing. He was waiting on his front porch when I pulled up. "You look like something happened," he said, before I'd even said hello. I handed him the pharmacy bag. Something did. We sat on his porch for 2 hours. He didn't say much. That was one of the things I loved about him. He never filled silence with words, just to seem like he was doing something. When I finished telling him everything, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was afraid of something like this. I want you to know that what he's done is not a reflection of how you were loved by this family." I had to look away. "I'm still going to bring the twins by on Sundays. I told him. If that's okay with you, whatever happens between him and me, that's not the twins' fault and it's not yours. He reached over and patted my hand once. I know you will, he said. You always have. The divorce proceedings started 3 weeks later. My husband had a plan. I could see the architecture of it clearly once things began. He would offer me the house, heavily mortgaged, barely equity, a modest lump sum settlement, and a shared custody arrangement that gave him the twins on paper while the paralegal would, in practice, be doing the daily parenting. He would keep his 401(k), which I had 10 years of my own paychecks quietly feeding. He would keep the investment account. He would keep the business credit lines he'd run up in both our names. His attorney was good. Mine was better. I had spent 4 years teaching high school English before I switched careers to curriculum development. I am very good at reading between lines. When I went through our financial documents, which I had quietly made copies of for 6 months before he ever said the words we need to talk, I found things, transfers, charges on business accounts that had nothing to do with business, a second credit card I was an authorized user on, but had never received a statement for. My attorney loved me. I came in organized. We met 3 times before the first mediation session, and at one of those meetings, she asked me what I actually wanted out of this settlement. Not what I was entitled to, what I wanted. I thought about it for a long time. I want the twins' college funds left completely untouched, I said. I want my retirement account returned to what it should be, accounting for what he redirected. I want the house bought out at fair market value. I paused. And I want his father. She stared at me. I want to be the one who takes over his father's care. Formally, legally, I want it in writing that I have authority to make medical decisions if needed, that I'm his emergency contact, that if something happens, he doesn't get handed off to some care facility. My husband picks while he's distracted with his new life. His father isn't an asset in a divorce settlement, she said carefully. I know. I'm not asking for him like he's a piece of furniture. I'm asking my husband to formally relinquish his father's care to me, to sign over power of attorney if his father agrees, because I know that man will be an afterthought the second my husband moves that woman into their life, and I will not watch him disappear. My attorney was quiet for a moment. Then she said, his father would have to agree and execute his own documents separately. I know. I'll ask him myself. When I asked my father-in-law, I sat down at his kitchen table with coffee and I told him exactly what I was thinking and why. I didn't dress it up. I told him that his son's new life was going to be consuming and loud and full of a person who had no history with him, and that I was worried he would start missing appointments and have nobody at the hospital waiting room and grow old in a way that was lonelier than it needed to be. He listened with his hands folded on the table. And what do you get out of this? He asked. I get to keep my Sunday person, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, where do I sign? The look on my husband's face during that mediation session is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. His attorney slid the proposal across the table and I watched my husband read through it. His retirement account, the house buyout, the college funds untouched, and then he got to the last page. She wants what? Your client agrees to support the transfer of elder care responsibility, including a durable power of attorney for healthcare to your client's father's choosing. His attorney read it back in the flattest possible voice. My husband looked at me. You want my dad? Your father has already executed his own documents separately with his own attorney, mine said. This is simply asking you not to contest it. Why would I contest it? He can do whatever he wants. Why does this need to be in the agreement? Because I want it in writing, I said. I want it to be official that you aren't going to change your mind in 2 years when he needs more help and suddenly become very interested in being involved. He stared at me, and then he did something I hadn't expected. He laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, it was a short, disbelieving sound, like something releasing. Fine, he said. Fine, whatever. Yes. He signed that page the fastest of all of them, and I understood something in that moment. To him, I had asked for the least valuable thing on the table. He was relieved. He thought he'd won. I moved into a 3-bedroom rental 40 minutes from the twins' school. My father-in-law moved into the second bedroom 2 months later, not because I insisted, but because he quietly mentioned that his condo's heating had been unreliable and he wasn't sleeping well, and we both knew what we were really saying. We established a rhythm quickly. I worked from home most days, curriculum contracts that I could do flexibly. He would make coffee before I came downstairs. I would drive him to his Thursday physical therapy. On Sundays, the twins came. They adored their grandfather, and he was endlessly patient with them in the way that grandfathers can be when they are not also managing a career and an ego. The paralegal lasted 8 months. I did not find this out from my husband. I found it out from my older twin, who overheard a phone call and reported to me with the solemn gravity of a 7-year-old that Daddy was yelling and crying, and it sounded like when the car won't start. My father-in-law heard this from across the living room and said nothing, but I saw the muscle in his jaw work once. After the paralegal, there was a period of quiet, and then my husband started calling more. Not about the twins specifically, but the kind of calls that don't have a stated reason. His voice sounded different, smaller. At one point, he asked how his father was doing, and I said he had a great week. We walked the park trail twice, and my husband went so quiet that I thought the call had dropped. "That's good," he finally said. That's good." The twins were adjusting better than I'd feared. Children are resilient in ways that humble you if you're paying attention. They cried some. They asked hard questions. My son wanted to know if it was something he'd done, and I spent a long time that night on the floor of his room after he fell asleep, just sitting with how much I hated having to exist in a world where a 7-year-old could even think that. What helped, and I say this as plainly as I can, was stability. Dinner at the same time every night. A grandfather who knew all their favourite card games. A mother who cried in the car and not in front of them, and who made sure they knew, every single day, that they were not to blame for any of it. About 14 months after the divorce was finalised, my father-in-law asked me to sit down with him at the kitchen table. He looked serious. He folded his hands the same way he had when I'd asked him about the power of attorney. "I need to show you some things," he said. He laid out a folder. Inside was a life insurance policy, a transfer on death deed for a piece of commercial property he'd owned for decades in a suburb I'd never heard him mention, and a handwritten letter addressed to me and to both my twins. "I've had this property since 1987, he said. Paid it off in 2001. I've been renting it to the same tenant, a dry cleaning business, for 19 years. The rental income has been going into a separate account." He pushed a bank statement toward me. I looked at the number. I looked at it again. I stopped. "It's yours," he said quietly. "And the twins. I changed the beneficiary designations and the TAD deed 18 months ago." He paused. "Before you asked me about the power of attorney, actually. I did it because I'd watched you for 11 years and I knew who you were. The divorce just made me move faster." I put my hand over my mouth. "I'm not giving it to you because I pity you," he said very firmly. "I'm giving it to you because you earned it, because you showed up, because you never once treated me like a burden." He looked at me with clear eyes. "My son is going to spend the rest of his life realizing what he traded away. I didn't want to wait for him to figure it out." I cried. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't." I sat at that kitchen table and I cried in a way I hadn't since the very beginning, except these were entirely different tears. He patted my hand once. "Now," he said, "do you want coffee? I am not going to tell you it was easy. The year after my divorce was some of the hardest, loneliest terrain I have ever moved through. There were nights I lay awake calculating whether I'd made the right choices, whether I should have fought harder for different things, whether the version of me who had burned so quietly and so long, without anyone noticing, had deserved better sooner. But I will tell you this. The dry cleaning property was worth more than my husband's investment account. The rental income was more than my monthly mortgage would have been on the house I didn't take. The twins' grandfather taught my son to play chess, and my daughter to balance a checkbook, and both of them to look adults in the eye when they spoke. And my husband, who had signed away his father's care in about 40 seconds, who had been so relieved to unload what he considered an obligation. My husband called me on a Sunday evening, about 2 years after the divorce, and said something I will never forget. "I've been thinking," he said, "about my dad, and I don't know. He went quiet. "Is he happy?" I looked across the living room at my father-in-law, who was deep in a card game with my 2 kids who were cheating transparently and being called out for it with great theatrical offence. "He's very happy," I said. My husband didn't say anything for a moment. "Good," he finally said. I'm glad someone is taking care of him." I didn't say I know. I didn't say you could have been. I just said, "Good night," and hung up and went back to the kitchen to make popcorn because it was Sunday, and Sunday evenings in my house were for card games and laughing and the particular kind of fullness that you can only build slowly out of showing up. That, in the end, is the thing I want you to understand. When I walked away from that marriage, I walked away from almost everything a divorce attorney would have told me to fight for. I left the furniture, the neighbourhood, the version of a life that looked right on the outside, and I took the one thing my husband couldn't see the value of, a quiet, steady old man who had watched me for 11 years and decided I was worth something. He was right, and so was I.